The silver towers of Lorax gleamed in the morning light, their perfect geometric angles reflecting the mathematical precision that defined the civilization that built them. Inside the tallest spire, Professor K stared at the holographic equation that dominated the center of the circular chamber. His four eyes narrowed in concentration, the pupils adjusting as they had thousands of times before when examining this same problem. 300 years, he muttered to himself, running a long, thin finger through the glowing symbols. 300 years, and still we cannot solve it. The unified field equation hung in the air, beautiful and maddening. Generations of Loraxian mathematicians had dedicated their lives to solving it, each adding layers of complexity, each bringing the solution incrementally closer, yet never quite reaching it. The equation promised to unlock the secret to faster-than-light travel, a technology that would transform their civilization from a single system species to one that could touch the stars beyond their reach. K had spent 120 of his 150 years of life working on this problem. His predecessors had mapped most of the framework, and he had devoted his considerable intellect to refining their work, adding new variables and constants that accounted for quantum disturbances in subspace. Yet something remained missing, a key insight that eluded them all. "Professor, the delegates are arriving." The voice belonged to his assistant, Nexa, who stood respectfully at the entrance to the chamber. K nodded without turning. "I will join them shortly." The Intergalactic Mathematical Congress happened once every 10 orbits. Representatives from the 12 most mathematically advanced species in their corner of the galaxy would gather to share discoveries and collaborate on problems too vast for any single civilization. The Loraxians hosted this year's Congress, and K, as chief mathematician, would preside. With a sigh, he saved his latest calculations and left the equation hanging in the air. Perhaps one of the visiting mathematicians would see something he had missed. The Congress Hall buzzed with activity. Delegates of various forms moved about the space, some floating on gravity disks, others walking on legs numbering from 2 to 8. Communication devices translated the dozen languages being spoken, creating a hum of overlapping conversations. K took his place at the head of the great oval table, and the room gradually fell silent. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into sounds each species could understand. "Welcome to the 15th Intergalactic Mathematical Congress. I am honored by your presence and eager to begin our exchange of ideas." The formalities proceeded as they always did. Each delegation presented their mathematical advancements since the last Congress. The Vril had developed a new theorem on quantum probability. The Nexians had refined their work on 11-dimensional topology. The Glix had constructed a proof for the Tanbar conjecture that had stood for 50 years. When all delegations had presented, K rose once more. "As is tradition, I will now share Lorax's greatest ongoing challenge, the unified field equation." He gestured, and the massive equation appeared above the table, rotating slowly so all could examine it. "As you know, we have worked on this problem for generations. We believe we are closer than ever to a solution, but still, it eludes us." Murmurs of appreciation filled the room. Even among these advanced species, the complexity of the equation impressed. "I estimate we are still 20 to 30 years from completing it," K continued. "But when we do, it will revolutionize space travel. The energy requirements for faster-than-light travel will decrease by orders of magnitude. The stars truly will be within our grasp." An old Vril raised a thin appendage. "Have you considered the lambda approach to the central paradox?" "We have," K replied. "It led to a promising path, but ended in contradictions when applied to real space conditions. For hours the mathematicians discussed the equation, suggesting approaches, identifying weaknesses, proposing alternatives. K noted each contribution carefully, but none offered the breakthrough he sought. As the session came to a close, a small commotion at the back of the hall caught his attention. A late arrival, unusual for this gathering of precise minds. "Forgive the interruption," said the coordinator, looking flustered. "We have just received word that a new species has arrived in our system. They call themselves humans." Ripples of curiosity moved through the assembly. Humans? Asked Kay. I am not familiar with this species. They are newly spacefaring, the coordinator explained. They have achieved interstellar travel using what they call fusion drives. Quite primitive, by our standards, but they have come a remarkable distance. Are they mathematically advanced? Asked a Nexian delegate. The coordinator looked uncertain. Their transmission included mathematical notation as a universal language. It seems basic, but functional. Kay found himself intrigued despite his focus on the Congress. Have they requested diplomatic contact? Yes, Professor, their ship will reach our orbit within 10 days. The Council has approved their visit and requests your presence as part of the welcoming delegation, given your status. Kay considered this. A new species was always interesting, though he doubted these newcomers would have anything to contribute to the grand problems that occupied Loraxian mathematics. Still, scientific curiosity was a core value of his people. I will attend, of course, he said. Now, shall we continue our discussion of the unified field equation? The delegates returned to the problem at hand, but an undercurrent of excitement remained. Most species in the Congress had known each other for centuries. A new intelligence, even a primitive one, offered novel perspectives. That evening, Kay returned to his private study. The equation filled his screens, the same as it had for decades. He made a few adjustments, tried a new approach to the quantum variance section, but found himself reaching the same dead end he had encountered months earlier. His mind kept wandering to the approaching human ship. He accessed the limited data they had shared, images of their world, basic details of their biology, examples of their mathematics. Their number system was simple, base 10, likely derived from counting their digits. Their mathematical notation seemed clumsy compared to the elegant systems used by the Congress species. Yet they had managed to cross the vast gulf between stars with such limited tools. There was something admirable in that. Kay turned back to the equation, staring at the section that had resisted solution for so long. Sometimes he wished for a fresh perspective, an entirely new way of seeing the problem. His species excelled at iterative improvements, at refining and perfecting existing approaches. But perhaps what the equation needed was something else. A conceptual leap rather than incremental advancement. He dismissed the thought. The Loraxian approach had solved countless difficult problems before. This one would yield eventually, with enough time and effort. The humans and their visit would be an interesting diversion, nothing more. As he prepared to rest for the night, Kay saved his work and shut down the holographic display. The equation disappeared, but never truly left his mind. It would be there, when he awoke, as it had been every day for over a century. Little did he know that the approaching human ship carried someone who would change everything he understood about his life's work. The human ship entered orbit around Lorax with none of the precision typical of interstellar vessels. It wobbled slightly, corrected course twice, and finally settled into a stable position that made the Loraxian traffic controllers wince. Professor, Kay watched from the observation deck of the orbital platform, his 4 eyes tracking the ungainly craft. Remarkable that they made it this far, commented Council Member Trell, who stood beside him. Their propulsion technology is centuries behind ours. Kay nodded. Yet they are here. There must be something interesting about these humans. The ship was called the Earth Star, according to the transmission data. It was hardly beautiful by Loraxian standards, a bulky cylinder with protruding modules and visible weld lines. No mathematical elegance, no perfect ratios in its construction, just functional engineering. They're requesting docking permission, said the platform controller. Their approach vector is unconventional. Guide them in carefully, ordered Trell. We don't want an accident during first contact. After 30 minutes of careful maneuvering, the human ship connected to the docking port with a heavy clunk that vibrated through the platform. Kay and the welcoming delegation waited as the airlock cycled and pressure equalized. The inner door slid open, and the humans stepped through. There were 5 of them, dressed in matching blue uniforms with different colored stripes on their shoulders. They stood on 2 legs, had 2 arms, and a single head with 2 eyes, far simpler in design than most species Kay had encountered. Their skin tones varied from light to dark brown, and the hair on their heads differed in color and length. One in front stepped forward. "Greetings from Earth and the United Space Initiative. I'm Captain Jack Miller of the Earth Star." His words came through Kay's translator with only a slight delay. Kay moved forward and performed the traditional Loraxian greeting gesture. "Welcome to Lorax. I am Professor Kay, Chief Mathematician and Representative of the Council of Sciences. Captain." Miller smiled, a facial expression the Loraxians had studied in the preliminary data. "It's an honor to meet you, Professor. We've traveled a long way for this moment." Indeed, 300 light years, if our calculations are correct. 312, actually, Miller said. "Took us 11 months in cryosleep. Not the fastest way to travel, but it's what we've got." Kay found the captain's directness refreshing. Most species engaged in lengthy ceremonial exchanges before acknowledging practical matters. The formal introductions continued. Besides Miller, the human delegation included their science officer, communications specialist, medical officer, and engineering chief. Each showed different mannerisms and speech patterns, more individual variation than Kay was accustomed to seeing in other species. "We've prepared accommodations suited to your biology," Trell told the humans, "and we've arranged a welcome ceremony to introduce you to our culture." "We appreciate your hospitality," Miller replied. "We've brought gifts from Earth as well." The gifts were simple but thoughtful: samples of human art, music recordings, books translated into standard galactic code, and foods preserved for the journey. The Loraxian delegation accepted them with proper ceremony, though Kay noticed the humans seemed somewhat impatient with the formal protocols. The welcome ceremony took place in the Grand Hall of Mathematics, Lorax's most prestigious cultural center. The vast chamber featured displays of the planet's mathematical achievements throughout its history, culminating in a massive holographic representation of the unified field equation that dominated the central area. Kay watched Miller during the tour. While the other humans politely observed the displays, the captain kept looking back at the great equation with unusual intensity. "You seem interested in our greatest challenge, Captain," Kay said, moving to stand beside him. Miller nodded. "I am. Before I joined the space program, I taught mathematics at a university on Earth." This surprised Kay. "You were a mathematician, yet you command a vessel?" "I'm both," Miller smiled. "On Earth, people often change careers. I loved teaching, but I wanted adventure too. When the opportunity came to explore beyond our solar system, I couldn't resist." Kay found this concept strange, the idea of abandoning one specialized field for another. On Lorax, one chose a discipline and perfected it throughout one's life. "Would you like to know more about the equation?" Kay offered, feeling unexpectedly eager to discuss his life's work with this curious human. "I would," Miller said with genuine enthusiasm. Kay led him to the central display and began explaining. "This is the unified field equation. It represents our attempt to reconcile quantum mechanics with gravitational physics in a way that would allow for efficient manipulation of space-time." "For faster-than-light travel," Miller said, nodding. "Precisely. We've worked on it for 300 years. I personally have dedicated 120 years to its solution." Miller's eyes widened. "You're over 120 years old?" "I am 150 of your Earth years," Kay said. "Our species typically lives to about 200. "That's remarkable," Miller said. "No wonder you've made such progress on complex problems. Our average lifespan is just under 100 years now, and most mathematicians only have 40 or 50 productive years." Kay felt a flicker of sympathy. Such short lives. How could they accomplish anything significant? "May I ask a question about this section?" Miller pointed to a complex cluster of symbols in the equation's center. "Of course. That represents the quantum fluctuation parameters in 11-dimensional space." Miller frowned slightly. "And these variables here control for the energy requirements?" "Yes. That's been one of our greatest challenges. The theoretical energy needed for faster-than-light travel is enormous. We've reduced it by a factor of 10,000 over the centuries, but it's still beyond our production capabilities." The human captain stared at the equation with surprising intensity. His eyes moved rapidly across the symbols, and he occasionally muttered something too quiet for Kay's translator to catch. "Have you considered?" Miller began, then stopped himself. "No, sorry. I shouldn't presume to offer suggestions on work you've spent lifetimes developing." Kay felt a mixture of amusement and curiosity. "Please, Captain, feel free to share your thoughts. We value fresh perspectives, even if they come from less mathematically advanced species." He tried to phrase this diplomatically. Miller smiled, but there was something in his expression Kay couldn't interpret. "It's probably nothing. Just an odd parallel to some work we did on Earth with fusion containment fields." Before Kay could inquire further, Council Member Trell approached. "The banquet is ready to begin, Professor. Captain Miller, would you and your crew join us?" The moment passed. Miller nodded and rejoined his crew, but Kay noticed how the humans' eyes lingered on the equation until they left the hall. The banquet proceeded according to Loraxian tradition. 17 courses, each representing a fundamental mathematical concept, served in precise sequence. The humans seemed overwhelmed by the formality, but made genuine efforts to appreciate the cultural significance. During the meal, Kay found himself seated beside Miller again. "Tell me, Captain, how did humanity develop interstellar travel with your level of mathematics?" He tried to ask this without sounding condescending. Miller took a sip of the blue Loraxian beverage before answering. "We're practical problem solvers, Professor. We may not have your theoretical elegance, but we're good at finding workable solutions. Sometimes being limited forces you to think differently." Kay considered this. An interesting perspective, but surely elegant theory leads to better practical solutions in the end. "Not always," Miller said. "Sometimes the perfect solution isn't necessary. Sometimes good enough gets you where you need to go while the perfect solution is still being calculated." There was wisdom in these words that Kay found unexpectedly compelling. The conversation shifted to other topics: Earth's culture, Loraxian history, the differences between their educational systems. As the evening ended and the humans prepared to return to their temporary quarters, Miller approached Kay one final time. "Professor, would it be possible for me to study your unified field equation in more detail? I find it fascinating, even if it's far beyond my capabilities." Kay felt pleased by the human's interest. "Of course, I can arrange for you to access our public mathematical archives tomorrow." "Thank you," Miller said, then hesitated before adding, "Sometimes a new set of eyes can see things differently, even if they don't see as much." As the humans departed, Kay found himself thinking about Miller's words. The captain was clearly intelligent, even if his species' mathematics was primitive by Loraxian standards. There was something refreshing about his approach, a directness and creativity that contrasted with the methodical precision of Loraxian thought. Still, the idea that a human could contribute anything meaningful to the unified field equation seemed absurd. The equation had challenged the finest minds of 12 advanced species for centuries. What could a newcomer possibly see that they had all missed? Kay dismissed the thought and turned his attention to preparations for tomorrow's formal presentation to the Mathematical Congress. Yet as he reviewed his notes that night, he found his mind returning to the human captain and the curious intensity in his eyes when he looked at the equation. Captain Jack Miller couldn't sleep. The quarters provided by the Loraxians were comfortable enough. They had carefully researched human requirements for temperature, gravity, and air composition. The bed was surprisingly suitable for his human frame. Yet sleep wouldn't come. The equation haunted him. He sat up and switched on the small light beside his bed. The clock on the wall, adjusted to Earth time, showed 3:17 a.m. His crew would be asleep for hours yet. Jack rubbed his eyes and reached for the data tablet the Loraxians had provided, containing information about their culture, history, and scientific achievements. He navigated to the section on the unified field equation again. "Computer," he said quietly. "Activate personal log, private entry." The tablet beeped in acknowledgement. "I can't stop thinking about their equation," Jack began. "It's beautiful work. Generations of brilliant minds building on each other's insights. But there's something off about their approach." He paused, collecting his thoughts. When I taught at MIT, I was always the odd one out in the department. Too intuitive, they said. Not rigorous enough. But I could see patterns that others missed because they were too focused on following established methods. Jack stood and began pacing the room, the tablet still recording. The Loraxians have built this massive mathematical structure, layer upon layer of complexity. But what if the solution isn't about adding more complexity? What if it's about stepping back and seeing a simpler pattern? He stopped pacing and stared out the small window at the unfamiliar stars. I need to work this through. Computer, can you interface with the ship's main system? Connection established, the tablet replied. Good. I need to run some calculations. Display the unified field equation, please. The holographic display activated, projecting the massive equation into the air of his quarters. Jack studied it, walking around the projection to view it from different angles. Let me try something, he muttered. Remove all variables related to the 11-dimensional quantum fluctuations. The equation shifted, large sections disappearing. Now remove the gravitational compensation factors for scales smaller than 1 nanometer. More sections vanished. Interesting. What if the solution isn't about accounting for every possible quantum fluctuation? What if it's about finding the, pattern that makes those fluctuations irrelevant? Jack's mind drifted back to his days at university. He had always been fascinated by historical approaches to mathematics, the elegant solutions found by ancient mathematicians with limited tools. Sometimes the constraints of their knowledge had forced creative insights that modern methods overlooked. Computer, display Earth's historical approach to fluid dynamics, specifically the Navier-Stokes approximations. A new set of equations appeared beside the Loraxian work. Now overlay them, matching conceptual similarities. The computer processed for a moment, then merged the displays. Patterns began to emerge. That's it, Jack whispered. They're trying to solve for every variable, but there's a pattern here that makes most of those variables cancel each other out. His excitement growing, Jack grabbed a stylus and began marking up the holographic display, drawing connections and writing new formulations. Hours passed unnoticed as he worked, fueled by the thrill of discovery. The memories of his academic career flashed through his mind, the frustration of colleagues who couldn't see what seemed obvious to him, the department head who suggested he might be better suited to applied work, rather than pure mathematics. The disappointment when his unconventional paper on pattern recognition and prime number distribution was rejected by major journals. That rejection had pushed him toward the space program. If the academic world wouldn't appreciate his approach to mathematics, perhaps exploration would offer different opportunities. Now, billions of miles from Earth, he found himself facing the ultimate mathematical challenge, one that had stumped an entire civilization of mathematical geniuses for centuries. What if, Jack muttered, staring at a particular section of the equation, what if the relationship isn't additive but multiplicative? Not A plus B plus C, but A times B times C. He made the adjustment in the equation and suddenly, entire sections simplified dramatically. Computer, calculate the energy requirements using this modified approach. The system hummed as it processed the complex calculations. Energy requirement. Reduced by factor of 1012, the computer finally reported. Jack stared in disbelief. That can't be right. Run it again with full error checking. After another minute of processing, the computer confirmed. Verification complete. Energy requirement. Reduced by factor of 10 to 12 from the Loraxian baseline model. If this was correct, it meant faster than light travel would require less energy than a standard fusion reactor produced. It would make interstellar travel not just possible but practical. I need to check this another way, Jack said, unwilling to trust such a revolutionary result without verification. He spent the next hour approaching the problem from different angles, looking for flaws in his reasoning. Each test confirmed his initial finding. The solution wasn't in adding more complexity to account for quantum fluctuations, it was in recognizing a pattern that made those fluctuations irrelevant at the macro scale. The approach was almost embarrassingly simple compared to the Loraxians' elaborate constructions. They had been so focused on precision and completeness that they had missed a fundamental pattern. As the first light of Lorax's sun began to filter through his window, Jack sat back. Exhausted but exhilarated, he had done it. He had solved the equation that had stumped an entire civilization for centuries, and he had no idea how to tell them. How would Professor K react to learning that his life's work, 120 years of dedicated study, had been essentially solved overnight by a member of a primitive species? The political implications alone were staggering. The Loraxians held their position in the Intergalactic Mathematical Congress largely due to their work on this equation. What would it mean for them if a newcomer casually solved their greatest challenge? Jack rubbed his tired eyes. He needed to approach this carefully. He couldn't simply announce that he had solved their grand problem. That would seem arrogant, and might be dismissed without consideration. He needed to lead them to see the solution themselves, to help them reach the insight that would validate his approach. A knock at his door startled him from his thoughts. "Captain Miller? Are you awake?" It was Dr. Levine, his science officer. Jack quickly saved his work and shut down the holographic display. "Yes, come in." The door slid open, and Levine entered, already dressed in her uniform. "I wanted to check if you were ready for the tour of the mathematical archives this morning. It's scheduled to begin in an hour." Jack glanced at the clock, 7:30 a.m. He had been working for over 4 hours without realizing it. "I'll be ready," he assured her, then hesitated. "Laura, can I ask you something? If you discovered something that would completely change another culture's understanding of their own field of expertise, how would you present it to them?" Levine gave him a curious look. "That's an unusual question. I suppose I would be very careful about how I framed it. No one likes to have their fundamental assumptions challenged, especially by an outsider." She studied his face. "Did you discover something in their mathematical archives?" Jack smiled tiredly. "Just a theoretical question. Thinking about cross-cultural, scientific exchange." She didn't seem entirely convinced, but nodded. "We should be diplomatic. Remember, we're representing Earth. The Loraxians have been hospitable, and we don't want to appear ungrateful or presumptuous." "Absolutely right," Jack agreed. "I'll get ready for the tour." After Levine left, Jack looked once more at the saved calculations on his tablet. The solution was there, elegant in its simplicity. The question now was how to share it without causing offense or disruption. He showered and dressed in his uniform, his mind still racing with mathematical formulas and diplomatic concerns. By the time he joined his crew in the common area of their quarters, he had formed a plan. He would use the tour of the mathematical archives to ask questions, carefully framed questions that might lead Professor K toward the insight himself. If that didn't work, he would have to be more direct. But one way or another, he couldn't keep this discovery to himself. The solution to the unified field equation could transform space travel for all species, including humanity. The potential benefits were too great to ignore, due to concerns about hurt feelings or cultural pride. As Jack led his crew toward the meeting point where Professor K waited to begin the tour, he felt the weight of his discovery pressing on him. The next few hours would be crucial. He would need all his diplomatic skill and mathematical insight to navigate this situation successfully. Professor K waited at the entrance to the mathematical archives, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence, a sign of anticipation in Loraxian body language. When Captain Miller and his crew arrived, K noted the human captain looked tired, with darkened areas under his eyes. "Did you not rest well, Captain Miller?" K asked as they exchanged greetings. Jack smiled faintly. "I was too fascinated by what I learned yesterday. Your mathematical achievements kept my mind busy." K felt pleased by this response. The human's interest in Loraxian mathematics seemed genuine, even if his understanding must necessarily be limited. "Today you will see our greatest treasures," K said, leading the group into the massive circular building. The archives contain the original work of every major Loraxian mathematician for the past 1,000 years. The humans gazed in wonder as they entered the main hall. Crystal data storage units lined the walls from floor to ceiling, each containing the complete works, of a mathematical master. The center of the room featured a large round table with embedded holographic projectors. "This is amazing," said Dr. Levine, the human science officer. "How do you organize all this knowledge?" "By mathematical field, then chronologically," Kay explained. "The most recent work is on the upper levels." The tour proceeded through the various sections of the archives. Kay explained the significance of key mathematical breakthroughs that had shaped Loraxian science and technology. The humans asked intelligent questions, showing more understanding than Kay had expected from their species. Throughout the tour, he noticed Captain Miller growing increasingly distracted. The human kept glancing at the displays related to the unified field equation, and several times began to speak, only to stop himself. When they reached the section dedicated to the current research on the equation, Kay gestured proudly to the latest additions. "These represent my own contributions over the past 20 years. We have refined the quantum variance calculations to unprecedented precision." Miller stepped forward, studying the equations with unusual intensity. "Professor Kay, may I ask what might seem like a simple question?" "Of course, Captain. Why did your mathematicians choose to approach the problem through an 11-dimensional model rather than simplifying to 5 dimensions?" Kay blinked in surprise. The question showed more understanding than he had anticipated. "The 11-dimensional approach allows us to account for all quantum fluctuations at the subatomic level. A simplified model would lose precision." Miller nodded thoughtfully. "And precision is the primary goal?" "Naturally," Kay replied. "Without absolute precision, the equation would be useless for practical applications." Miller seemed to consider this carefully before asking, "What if absolute precision isn't necessary? What if there's a pattern that makes those fluctuations statistically irrelevant at the macro scale?" The question struck Kay as odd. That would contradict our fundamental understanding of space-time mechanics. Every quantum fluctuation must be accounted for. Miller looked like he wanted to say more, but glanced at Dr. Levine, who gave him a warning look. The human captain simply nodded and moved on with the tour. After completing their circuit of the archives, Kay brought the group to the central table. "Now I have arranged for a special demonstration. This projector can display any mathematical work in our collection for collaborative study." He activated the system, and the unified field equation appeared above the table, rotating slowly. "I thought you might enjoy seeing the complete equation in its current form." Miller stared at the equation, then looked directly at Kay. "Professor, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I've been thinking about your equation all night. Would it be possible to test a different approach?" Kay felt a mixture of amusement and curiosity. The human's presumption was almost endearing. "What did you have in mind, Captain?" Miller stepped forward hesitantly. "May I?" He gestured to the control panel. Kay nodded, expecting a basic question or perhaps a misunderstanding of the equation's fundamentals. Miller began to manipulate the equation display, simplifying sections and rearranging terms. His fingers moved, with surprising confidence across the Loraxian interface. "If we look at the equation through the lens of pattern recognition, rather than absolute precision," Miller explained as he worked, "we can see that these quantum fluctuations follow a predictable distribution." Kay watched with growing concern as the human drastically simplified his life's work. "Captain, I appreciate your interest, but this approach removes critical elements needed for accurate—" "Please, just give me one more minute," Miller said, his focus intense. "What if instead of treating each quantum fluctuation as a discrete variable, we treat them as a statistical distribution with predictable properties?" To Kay's astonishment, Miller transformed the massive equation into a much simpler form. The elegant simplicity of it was shocking, beautiful in a way Kay had never considered. "Now, if we calculate the energy requirements using this model," Miller continued, instructing the system to run the calculations. The result appeared above the table: energy requirement reduced by factor 10^12. Silence fell over the room. The Loraxian assistants who had been guiding the tour stared in disbelief. Kay's 4 eyes widened to their maximum aperture. "That's impossible," he finally said. "The system must have a computational error." "Run it again," Miller suggested gently, Test it however you need to. Kay immediately began a series of verification procedures, his long fingers flying across the control panel. Each test confirmed Miller's result. The simplified approach reduced the energy requirements for faster-than-light travel to a level that was actually achievable with current technology. This cannot be correct, Kay insisted, his voice tinged with distress. 300 years of work by our greatest minds. Miller's expression showed genuine sympathy. Professor, your work wasn't wrong. It was necessary to understand the problem fully. Without it, I couldn't have seen the pattern. The other humans stood awkwardly to the side, sensing the gravity of the moment. Dr. Levine stepped forward and placed a hand on Miller's shoulder, murmuring something the translator didn't catch. Kay felt as though the floor beneath him had vanished. If this human was correct, and the calculation suggested he was, then the work Kay had dedicated his life to had been solved in a single night by a member of a species that had barely achieved interstellar travel. I need to inform the Council, Kay said stiffly. And the Congress delegates. Miller nodded. I understand, and I apologize if I've caused any distress. That wasn't my intention. Kay struggled to process his feelings. On one level, he felt devastated. 120 years of work, seemingly, made irrelevant overnight. On another level, his scientific curiosity was captivated by the elegant solution. The mathematician in him recognized the beauty of Miller's approach. How did you see it? Kay asked, his voice quieter now. What made you look at the problem differently? Miller considered the question carefully. On Earth, I was often criticized for being too intuitive in my approach to mathematics. But when resources are limited, when you don't have centuries to solve a problem, you look for shortcuts, for patterns that might let you skip steps. The explanation was both simple and profound. The Loraxians had never needed to look for shortcuts. With their long lifespans and methodical approach, they had always assumed that more precision, more complexity, would eventually yield the solution. Kay looked at the simplified equation again. The Council of Mathematicians will need to verify this independently. I will arrange a presentation for tomorrow. Of course, Miller agreed. I'm happy to explain my approach to anyone who wants to understand it. As they left the archives, Kay found himself walking beside Miller, slightly separated from the others. Captain, he said quietly, if your solution proves correct, it will change everything we thought we knew about space-time mechanics. Miller nodded. Scientific revolutions often come from unexpected directions. And what will your people do with this discovery? Kay asked, suddenly concerned about the implications of giving such powerful knowledge to a young species. Miller seemed to understand the worry behind the question. The same thing we hope your people will do, use it to explore, to learn, to connect with others. Earth has no interest in conquest, Professor. We're too busy trying to understand the universe. Kay wanted to believe him. The human seemed sincere, and there was something about his approach to knowledge, his willingness to challenge assumptions, to see patterns where others saw only complexity, that resonated with the fundamental Loraxian value of truth-seeking. As they parted ways, Kay headed immediately to the council chambers. He needed to report this development and begin preparing for tomorrow's presentation. His mind raced with implications, scientific, cultural, political. The unified field equation had defined his life. Now, its solution would define his legacy, and that solution had come from the most unexpected source imaginable, a human captain who had once been a mathematician, who looked at problems differently because his species didn't have the luxury of time. The Grand Hall of the Loraxian Science Academy had never been so crowded. Representatives from all 12 species of the Intergalactic Mathematical Congress filled the tiered seating, their varied forms creating a colorful tapestry of alien life. The central stage held a large holographic projector, where Captain Jack Miller stood beside Professor Kay, both looking slightly uncomfortable for very different reasons. We call to order this special session of the Congress, announced Elder Vex, the ancient Loraxian who served as head of the Council of Sciences. We have gathered to witness a presentation regarding the unified field equation, which has been the focus of our collective efforts for generations. Murmurs spread through the assembly. The sudden announcement of a special session had created a buzz of speculation throughout the scientific community. Some had heard rumors of a breakthrough, but few knew the details or the source. Elder Vex continued, "Professor K will introduce our guest presenter." K stepped forward, his four eyes blinking in the deliberate rhythm that Loraxians use to indicate formal speech. He had spent a sleepless night verifying Miller's work with his most trusted colleagues. The results were undeniable, but the implications were still difficult to accept. "Esteemed colleagues," K began, "for 300 years, our civilization has dedicated its finest minds to solving the unified field equation. I myself have spent 120 years refining our approach, adding layers of precision to account for quantum fluctuations in 11 dimensions." The audience nodded in appreciation of this dedication. Yesterday, a new perspective was shared with me, a perspective so different from our own that at first I dismissed it as impossible, but after rigorous testing, I must acknowledge its validity. K gestured to Miller, who stood straighter in his blue uniform. "Captain Jack Miller of Earth has proposed a solution that fundamentally changes our understanding of the equation. I invite him to present his findings." The silence in the hall was absolute as Miller stepped forward. Kay could sense the skepticism among the delegates. How could a member of a newly spacefaring species solve what had stumped the greatest minds of 12 advanced civilizations? "Thank you, Professor K," Miller began, his voice calm despite the pressure. "I want to start by acknowledging the brilliant work done by Loraxian mathematicians over centuries. Without your meticulous research and precision, I could never have recognized the pattern that led to this solution." It was a diplomatic opening, and Kay appreciated the human's tact. Miller activated the holographic display, showing the full complexity of the unified field equation as it had existed yesterday. "This equation represents one of the greatest mathematical achievements I've ever encountered. Its precision is remarkable." Then he began to manipulate the display just as he had done in the archives. But when approaching the problem of faster-than-light travel, absolute precision may not be necessary. What if, instead of accounting for every quantum fluctuation individually, we treat them as a statistical distribution with predictable properties? The equation transformed before their eyes, sections collapsing into simpler forms, variables combining or canceling entirely. Some delegates leaned forward in their seats, others whispered urgently to their colleagues. By recognizing that these fluctuations follow patterns at the macro level, we can simplify the approach dramatically. Miller continued, moving confidently through his explanation. "The result is a solution that requires vastly less energy to implement." He displayed the final calculations. The energy requirement reduced by a factor of 1 trillion, a practical, achievable level with current technology. "This isn't just a theoretical exercise," Miller concluded. "This makes faster-than-light travel possible now, not in some distant future." The hall erupted in sound. Exclamations of disbelief, urgent questions, excited discussions. Elder Vex raised all 4 hands, for silence which gradually returned. "These claims are extraordinary," said a vril delegate rising from her seat. "Has this solution been verified?" "It has," Kay confirmed, stepping forward again. "I assembled a team of our leading mathematicians who worked through the night. We approached the problem from multiple angles and ran thousands of simulations. The results consistently support Captain Miller's solution." Another delegate, a floating spherical being from the Nexian system, moved forward. "How did a species with such limited mathematical development see what we all missed?" Miller smiled slightly. "With respect, it's precisely because of our limitations that we found this solution. On Earth, mathematicians don't have centuries to solve problems. Our lifespans are short, our resources limited. We're forced to look for patterns, for shortcuts." He gestured to the simplified equation. "This isn't about being smarter. It's about thinking differently. You sought perfect precision because you could afford to. We seek functional approximations because we must." Kay found himself nodding in agreement. There was profound wisdom in the human's words, a perspective he had never considered. "If I may," Kay addressed the assembly, I believe what we're witnessing is not the superiority of human mathematics, but the value of diversity in scientific thought. Different evolutionary paths, different cultural approaches, different constraints, all leading to unique ways of seeing the same problem. The delegates considered this, many indicating agreement in their species-specific ways. Elder Vex spoke again. If this solution proves practical, it will transform our understanding of spacetime mechanics and revolutionize interstellar travel. The implications are profound for all our civilizations. Which brings us to an important question, said a tall, crystalline being from the outer systems. Who will control this technology? The humans? The Loraxians? The Congress as a whole? All eyes turned to Miller, who looked momentarily surprised by the question. On Earth, we believe knowledge of this importance belongs to everyone. We didn't come here to claim ownership of an idea. We came to establish friendship and exchange knowledge. He looked at Kay. I propose a joint development program. Loraxian precision combined with human intuition. Together we can turn this theoretical solution into practical technology faster than either of us could alone. Kay felt a profound sense of relief. The human wasn't trying to claim superiority or take control of the discovery. He was offering partnership. I support this proposal, Kay said firmly, and I volunteer to lead the Loraxian side of the collaboration. The months that followed transformed not just space travel, but the relationship between species across the known galaxy. The first prototype faster-than-light drive was built in a new joint facility established on Lorax's largest moon. Teams of Loraxian and human scientists worked side by side, each bringing their unique perspectives to the challenges of implementation. What had once seemed impossible, moving faster than light, became reality within a year. The maiden voyage of the test ship Unity, with Professor Kay and Captain Miller as co-commanders, traveled 10 light years in under an hour, then safely returned. Kay found himself profoundly changed by the experience. His initial devastation, at having his life's work seemingly made irrelevant, had transformed into excitement about new possibilities. He and Miller had become not just colleagues but friends, each learning from the other's approach to science and to life. On the observation deck of the Unity after their successful test flight, Kay found Miller staring out at the stars. "What are you thinking, Jack?" Kay asked, using the human's first name as he had been invited to do. Miller smiled. "I'm thinking about an old saying from Earth. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Kay tilted his head, considering the metaphor. An apt description of scientific progress. "Your work made my insight possible," Miller said. "Without the precision of your approach, I would have had nothing to simplify, no pattern to recognize." Kay's 4 eyes blinked in the pattern that humans had learned meant appreciation. "And without your fresh perspective, we might have spent another century adding complexity without seeing the underlying pattern." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars that were now truly within reach. "The Council has approved expanding the joint program," Kay said eventually. "Representatives from all 12 Congress species will be joining us along with more humans from Earth. They're calling it the Galactic Collaborative for Scientific Advancement." "A new era of cooperation," Miller nodded, "each species bringing its unique perspective to our shared challenges." Kay had lived 150 years, but he had never felt more excitement about the future than he did now. The universe had just become much smaller and infinitely more accessible. New civilizations would be discovered, new knowledge gained, new friendships formed, all because they had learned the most important equation of all, that different ways of thinking, when combined, could achieve what neither could accomplish alone. "I have a proposal for our next project," Kay said, turning to his human friend. "There's another equation we've struggled with for generations, a unified theory of consciousness. Perhaps it too could benefit from a fresh perspective." Miller grinned. "I know just the human philosopher who might help us with that one." As the Unity made its way back to Lorax, carrying news that would change the course of galactic history, Kay reflected on how quickly his understanding of the universe had expanded, not through the addition of complexity, but through the elegant simplicity of a new perspective. Sometimes the most profound truths were not the most complicated, but the simplest. That was the axiom of simplicity, a principle that transcended species and would guide their shared future among the stars. Captain James Wright stood at the viewport of his brother's home, looking out at the sprawling colony of New Eden. The settlement stretched across the valley floor, its buildings gleaming in the light of Epsilon Eridani, a star not unlike Earth's sun but with a distinct orange tint that gave the colony its unique glow. After 6 months in the cramped quarters of his scout ship, the open spaces and fresh air of New Eden felt like paradise. "More coffee?" asked Robert, his older brother, appearing at his side with a steaming pot. James nodded and held out his cup. "Thanks, I still can't believe how much this place has grown. 3 million people now?" 3.2 million according to last month's count, Robert said with pride. He had been among the first wave of colonists 15 years ago, when New Eden was nothing but prefab shelters and ambitious plans. Now his wife Lisa managed one of the colony's largest hydroponic farms, and their 10-year-old son Michael attended a school that rivaled Earth's finest. "Uncle James!" Michael came running into the room holding a small model spaceship. "Is this one like yours?" James knelt down and examined the toy with exaggerated seriousness. "Almost, but mine doesn't have these fancy guns on the side. My scout ship is built for speed, not fighting." "But what if you meet aliens?" Michael asked, his eyes wide. "In 200 years of space exploration, we haven't found any intelligent alien life," James replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "Just plants and simple animals." The colony's emergency siren chose that moment to blare, its wailing sound cutting through the peaceful morning. James froze, years of military training kicking in. Robert moved to the window, confusion on his face. "Probably another drill," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. James was already reaching for his communicator when the sky turned blood red. A massive shadow fell across the colony as something enormous moved into position above New Eden. "Get to the shelter," James ordered, military authority replacing his relaxed demeanor. "Now!" The colony's defense systems came online, a network of ground-based energy cannons that could handle pirate ships or asteroids. They fired upward at the massive object, but the beams seemed to dissolve harmlessly against an invisible barrier. James's communicator buzzed with an incoming colony-wide broadcast. "Unidentified vessels detected in orbit. This is not a drill. All citizens proceed to emergency shelters immediately." Robert grabbed Michael while Lisa rushed in from the kitchen. "What's happening?" she asked, fear in her eyes. Before James could answer, a beam of intense blue light shot down from the ship above, striking the colony's main power plant. The explosion rattled windows throughout the settlement, and the lights flickered before emergency power kicked in. "We need to get to my ship," James said, making a quick decision. "It's at the spaceport on the eastern edge. If we hurry," another explosion, closer this time, knocked them off their feet. Through the window, James saw more beams striking key points around the colony. The defense control center, the communications array, the spaceport. "They're taking out our infrastructure," he muttered, military training helping him analyze the attack pattern. "This isn't random. They know exactly what they're targeting." "Who are they?" Lisa asked, holding Michael close. "I don't know," James admitted. "But we need to move." The family rushed to Robert's ground vehicle, a sturdy transport designed for the colony's rough terrain. As they drove through increasingly chaotic streets, James tried to contact his crew at the spaceport. Static was his only answer. Above them, smaller craft were now descending from the massive ship, sleek angular vessels that moved with impossible speed. They fired more precisely, targeting defense installations and government buildings. "The secondary spaceport," James said suddenly. "The one they use for maintenance. My scout ship isn't there, but there might be something we can use." Robert nodded grimly and changed direction, driving away from the colony center where most of the destruction was concentrated. The secondary spaceport was little more than a collection of hangars and repair bays at the edge of the settlement, used primarily for service and emergency landings. As they approached, a message came through, on all frequencies in perfect Earth Standard language. "Your expansion ends here. Return to your homeworld or face extinction." The voice was flat, emotionless, with an artificial quality that suggested translation technology. "They're talking to us," Lisa whispered. "Actual aliens." "Not very friendly ones," James replied, scanning the spaceport ahead. Most of the ships were undergoing repairs, but he spotted a transport vessel that looked operational. There, that supply runner might have enough fuel to reach the jump point. The spaceport was deserted, its workers having fled to shelters or been caught in the initial attack. James used his military override codes to access the transport ship, a blocky vessel designed to carry goods rather than people, but equipped with basic life support. "Everyone inside," he ordered, helping Lisa and Michael up the ramp while Robert gathered emergency supplies from a nearby storage locker. Through the viewports, they could see more devastating beams striking the colony. Buildings collapsed, and fire spread rapidly through residential areas. The colony's limited defensive fire was weakening as more installations were destroyed. James powered up the transport systems, praying that its engines would respond. The ship hummed to life and relief washed over him, until a shadow fell across the cockpit. One of the alien vessels hovered directly overhead, its weapons ports glowing with energy. "Hang on!" James shouted, slamming the thrust controls forward. Die. Transport lurched out of the hangar moments before a beam struck where they had been, vaporizing the structure. James guided the ungainly vessel upward, pushing its engines beyond safe limits. The alien craft pursued, but seemed more interested in continuing the colony assault than chasing one fleeing ship. As they climbed through the atmosphere, the full horror became clear. The alien vessel was enormous, at least 10 kilometers long, with dozens of smaller craft swarming around it. And it wasn't alone. 2 more ships of similar size were positioned around the colony. "They're going to destroy everything," Robert said, his voice hollow as he watched through the rear viewport. James activated the transport's long-range sensors, recording everything they could detect about the alien ships: energy signatures, composition, weapons capabilities. It wasn't much, but it might give Earth a fighting chance when, these beings attacked again. The transport shuddered as it pushed beyond the atmosphere. James set course for the system's jump point, where they could enter faster than light travel back to the nearest human outpost. "We can't just leave," Lisa protested, tears streaming down her face. "We have to warn Earth," James replied grimly. "We're the only ones who can." As the transport limped toward the jump point, they watched through the sensors as the alien ships methodically reduced New Eden to ash. The colony that had taken decades to build was destroyed in hours. 3 million lives erased. Michael slept fitfully in his mother's arms, unaware that his home no longer existed. Robert and Lisa sat in stunned silence, occasionally reaching for each other's hands. James stored the sensor data and prepared the jump calculations. His military training kept him functioning despite the shock and grief. One thought burned in his mind, growing from a spark to a raging fire. They would pay for this. Humanity would not cower. Humanity would not retreat. For every soul lost on New Eden, 1,000 ships would answer. The journey back to Earth took 6 days in the stolen transport ship. 6 days of nightmares for James, his mind replaying the destruction of New Eden each time he closed his eyes. 6 days of watching his brother's family grieve for their home and friends. 6 days of planning what he would say to Earth's leaders. When they finally reached Earth orbit, they were met by a military escort. News of New Eden's silence had already reached the home planet, but no one knew what had happened. The sight of a civilian transport arriving instead of Captain Wright's scout ship had raised immediate concerns. Admiral Anna Thompson waited in the debriefing room at Earth Defense Headquarters. She was a tall woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. 20 years commanding the defense fleet had left her with a reputation for being tough but fair. "Captain Wright," she said as James entered. Her eyes darted to the civilians, behind him. "I wasn't informed you had passengers." "My brother and his family," James replied. "The only survivors of New Eden that I know of." The room went silent. Admiral Thompson's composure cracked for just a moment before she regained control. Survivors? You mean? New Eden is gone, James said, his voice flat. Completely destroyed by an alien force with technology far beyond ours. He connected his data chip to the room's display system. Images appeared on the screen. The massive alien ships, the devastating weapons, the methodical destruction of an entire colony. I recorded everything I could, James explained. Sensor readings, energy, signatures, weapons capabilities. They called themselves the Vex. At least that's the closest I can translate. They left a message before they started firing. He played the recorded message. Your expansion ends here. Return to your homeworld or face extinction. Admiral Thompson studied the data with a grim expression. You did well to bring this back, Captain. Your quick thinking may have given us a chance. She turned to an aide. Call an emergency session of the United Earth Government. All representatives, including those from the colonies. Priority 1. 3 days later, representatives from every human settlement gathered in the Grand Assembly Hall in Geneva. Colony. Leaders participated via holographic projection, their faces showing varying degrees of shock and fear as they learned about New Eden's fate. James sat with his brother's family in a private section, all of them still wearing borrowed clothes. Robert stared blankly ahead, while Lisa tried to keep Michael occupied with a tablet game. The boy was too young to fully understand what had happened, but he knew enough to be quieter than any 10-year-old should be. Admiral Thompson stood at the central podium, her uniform crisp and perfect, her posture unyielding. The hall fell silent as she began to speak. 3 days ago, we received confirmation that New Eden Colony was destroyed by an alien force calling themselves the Vex. Over 3 million of our people were killed in an unprovoked attack. The evidence suggests this was not a misunderstanding or a limited conflict, but a deliberate act of genocide. Murmurs ran through the assembly. On the screen showing the colonial representatives, faces paled. The Vex left a message demanding that we cease all expansion and retreat to Earth or face extinction. Thompson paused, letting the words sink in. I am here today to tell you what our answer will be. She gestured, and the large screen behind her displayed images of New Eden before the attack, the thriving colony, the schools, the farms, the people. They believed destroying one colony would break our will to explore the stars. They believed we would cower and retreat. They do not understand humanity. Her voice grew stronger. For every life taken on New Eden, 1,000 ships will answer. The assembly erupted in a mix of cheers and shocked exclamations. Thompson raised her hand for silence. I propose an immediate shift to wartime production across all human settlements. Every shipyard, factory, and fabrication plant will be converted to military manufacturing. Scientists and engineers will focus on developing countermeasures to Vex technology based on Captain Wright's data. The Mars representative, a thin man with the pale skin of someone who lived under domes, spoke up. 1,000 ships for every life? That's over 3 billion vessels. We don't have the resources or time. It's not literal, interrupted the representative from Europa, a dark-skinned woman whose family had led the Ice Moon's settlement for generations. It's a statement of intent, but I agree with the Admiral. We must respond with overwhelming force. Thompson nodded. I propose a fleet of 900,000 ships. It's an ambitious number, but achievable if we commit all our resources and work together. This won't be just a military response, but a message to any other species watching. Attack humanity at your peril. The debate lasted for hours. Some argued for attempting communication first. Others feared committing so completely to war might leave human settlements vulnerable to other threats. But as the day wore on, the images of New Eden's destruction kept returning to the screens, and with them, resolve hardened. James was called to speak about what he had witnessed. He stood tall despite his exhaustion and grief. I watched my nephew's school vaporized, he said simply. I saw farms burning and hospitals collapsing. The Vex didn't try to communicate before attacking. They didn't target only military installations. They methodically erased an entire human settlement from existence. He paused. We can try to talk to them. But we should do it from a position of strength, not fear. By day's end, the vote was nearly unanimous. Operation Righteous Response would begin immediately. Humanity was going to war. James found himself promoted to commander and given leadership of a special operations unit. Their mission: gather intelligence on the enemy while the fleet was being built. "We need to know more about what we're facing," Admiral Thompson told him in her office a week after the assembly. "Your scout ship has been upgraded with the best stealth technology we have. Your job is to infiltrate the edge of what we believe is Vex territory and bring back information." James looked at the star chart on her desk, noting the systems marked with red warning symbols. "These are all beyond the range of our normal patrols." "Yes, and that may be why the Vex targeted New Eden first. It was our farthest colony, pushing into space they apparently consider theirs." Thompson's eyes were hard. "Your brother and his family will be given new identities and a home on Earth, with full government support. I understand if you want to stay with them." "No," James interrupted. "I need to do this, for them and for everyone on New Eden." 1 month later, James and his crew of 12 departed Earth in their modified scout ship, now renamed Memory of Eden. Their mission would take them dangerously close to where the Vex had been encountered, with no guarantee of return. As the ship entered the jump point and disappeared from Earth's sensors, production was already underway across the solar system. Shipyards on Earth, Mars, and the moons of Jupiter and Saturn worked around the clock. Ships designed for exploration and colonization were being retrofitted with weapons and armor. In laboratories, scientists studied the data James had brought back, looking for weaknesses in Vex technology. The first breakthrough came when they discovered a unique frequency that disrupted the alien shielding systems. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Humanity had been attacked, but humanity would not fall. The Vex had destroyed one colony, believing it would force a retreat. They would soon learn how wrong they were. 6 months into the mission, Commander James Wright's scout ship Memory of Eden drifted silently at the edge of a star system 30 light-years from where New Eden had stood. The ship's enhanced stealth systems made it nearly invisible to sensors, allowing James and his crew to observe Vex activities without detection. "Another supply convoy," reported Tina, the sensor specialist. Her eyes never left the screen as she recorded the movement of 5 Vex vessels. "Same route as the others. They're definitely supplying something in the Arcturus system." James moved to stand behind her, studying the data. After months of careful observation, they had mapped significant portions of Vex territory. The picture emerging was surprising. "Still no sign of any major fleet movements," he noted. "Their patrol patterns suggest they're defending only 16 star systems, not the vast empire we feared." Lieutenant Marcus, the tactical officer, nodded in agreement. "Their technology is impressive, but their numbers don't match what we expected. I count fewer than 5,000 ships total across all monitored systems." "They attacked New Eden because they feared our expansion," James said, the realization crystallizing in his mind. "Not because they were already planning a full invasion." He moved to the communication station. "Prepare a data packet for Earth. Include all our observations and my assessment. The Vex are technologically superior but limited in scope and numbers. They struck New Eden as a warning, expecting us to retreat in fear." As the encrypted message was prepared for transmission, James stared at the star map they had compiled. The Vex homeworld had been identified, a planet orbiting a yellow star very similar to Sol. Images showed sprawling cities and massive orbital structures, evidence of a highly advanced civilization. "What do you think Earth will do with this information, Commander?" asked Marcus. "It won't change our response," James replied, his voice firm. "But it might change our strategy. The Vex need to learn that humanity doesn't scare easily." 1 year after the fall of New Eden, Admiral Anna Thompson stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned dreadnought Remembrance. Through the massive viewports, she watched as ships gathered in Earth orbit, thousands upon thousands of vessels ranging from tiny fighters to enormous carriers. Thompson's aide, Lieutenant Perez, approached with a tablet. "Final count confirmed. Admiral, 900,000 vessels assembled and ready. It's..." It's magnificent. Thompson nodded, allowing herself a moment of pride. The industrial achievement was unprecedented in human history. Shipyards across the solar system had worked without pause for a year, an effort that united humanity like nothing before. "Status report from the fleet commanders?" she asked. "All sections report ready," Perez replied. "Admiral Davis commands the vanguard of 300,000 ships. Admiral Khatri leads the main battle group of 400,000. You command the strategic reserve of 200,000. Thompson studied the tactical display showing the vast armada. Each dot represented a ship. The screen was so crowded with them that they formed a solid mass in Earth orbit. Never in history had humans assembled such a force. And Commander Wright's special forces? His teams are distributed throughout the fleet, prepared for ground operations once we reach Vex territory. The intelligence he gathered has been crucial to our planning." Thompson nodded. Wright's mission had revealed vital information. Most importantly, that the Vex were not the unstoppable empire they had initially feared. Their technology was superior, but their territory was limited to a handful of star systems. They had attacked New Eden not from a position of overwhelming strength, but from fear of human expansion. A message alert sounded, and the main screen shifted to show the face of President Garcia of the United Earth Government. "Admiral Thompson," the president said, her expression solemn, "the final authorization has been given. Operation Righteous Response may commence at your discretion." Thompson straightened, feeling the weight of history on her shoulders. "Understood, Madam President. We will not fail." After the call ended, Thompson turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel to all ships." The officer worked his console. "Channel open, Admiral. You're addressing the entire fleet." Thompson took a deep breath before speaking, her words traveling to 900,000 vessels and the millions of men and women who crewed them. "This is Admiral Thompson. 1 year ago, an alien force destroyed the colony of New Eden, killing over 3 million innocent people. Today, we answer that atrocity. Our mission is clear: to ensure that no human colony will ever again face such a threat." She paused, looking out at the assembled fleet. "We carry with us the memory of New Eden, but we also carry the future of humanity. We fight not only for vengeance, but for our right to exist among the stars without fear. The Vex believed that destroying one colony would break our will. Today they learn how wrong they were." Throughout the fleet, crews listened in. Silence. On fighters designed for speed and maneuverability, pilots ran final checks on their systems. On massive carriers housing hundreds of smaller craft, flight crews prepared for launch. On specialized electronic warfare platforms, technicians monitored the new weapons designed specifically to counter Vex shielding technology. Thompson concluded her address. "Each ship in this fleet represents the work of countless hands. Each crew member represents the unbreakable spirit of humanity. Together we make this promise to the memory of New Eden. You are not forgotten, and you will be avenged." She nodded to her navigation officer. "Initiate jump sequence. All ships, to follow in formation." In the lead scout ship, Commander James Wright received the order to jump. His vessel would be among the first to arrive in Vex territory, tasked with confirming the enemy positions before the main fleet arrived. As his ship prepared to enter the jump point, James thought of his brother's family. Robert, Lisa, and Michael had been given a new home on Earth, but their lives would forever bear the scar of New Eden's destruction. Michael, now 11, still had nightmares about the day the sky turned red. "Jump calculations complete, Commander," reported his navigator. "Ready on your order." James nodded. "Take us in." The scout ship disappeared into the jump point, followed by thousands of others. Across the solar system, humans watched news reports of the fleet's departure with a mixture of pride, hope, and apprehension. For the first time in its history, humanity was taking war to the stars. In shipyards throughout human space, production continued. Though 900,000 ships had departed, more were being built. A clear message that humanity's response would not end with this first wave. The industrial machine that had been set in motion would not easily stop. On the rebuilt bridge of the Civilian, transport that had carried him and his family to safety, Robert Wright watched the fleet depart. The ship had been repaired and upgraded, now serving as a medical support vessel in the fleet's rear echelon. For New Eden, Robert whispered, thinking of the home and life they had lost. Throughout the Armada, the same sentiment echoed. For New Eden, for humanity, for the future. The great assembly of ships, the largest fleet ever created by human hands, vanished into jump points across the solar system, bound for Vex territory and the reckoning that awaited. The first wave of 300,000 human ships emerged from jump points at the edge of the Vex star system, designated Target Alpha. Commander James Wright's scout ship was among the first to arrive, its advanced sensors immediately scanning for enemy positions. Multiple Vex vessels detected, reported Tina, her fingers flying across the sensor station. Approximately 2,000 ships in defensive positions around the third planet. James studied the tactical display. The Vex had arranged their ships in a spherical formation around their colony world, a standard defensive posture. What wasn't standard was their reaction, or lack thereof. They're not moving to intercept, James noted with surprise. Either they don't see us yet, or they're in shock, finished Lieutenant Marcus. Our intelligence suggested they never expected a human response of this magnitude. James opened a channel to Admiral Davis's flagship. Commander Wright reporting. Vex fleet confirmed at Target Alpha, approximately 2,000 vessels. They appeared to be in a defensive posture only. No indication of advance toward our position. Admiral. Davis's voice came through clearly. Understood, Commander. Continue monitoring. Main battle group will emerge in 5 minutes. Be advised that we are detecting unusual communications traffic between Vex vessels. They appear to be panicking. James couldn't help the grim smile that crossed his face. They expected us to cower after New Eden. They never imagined this. As predicted, 5 minutes later, the main battle group of 400,000 ships emerged from their jump points. The human fleet now stretched across an enormous section of space, dwarfing the Vex defensive force. On the Vex command ship, Supreme Commander Krell stared at the sensor readings in disbelief. The translator implant in his brain struggled to find the right words in his language for what he was seeing. Impossible, he finally managed. Their fleet, it cannot be this large. His second-in-command, Officer Tarn, was equally stunned. The humans were supposed to retreat after we destroyed their colony. Our analysts predicted they would abandon their expansion plans and return to their home system. Obviously, Krell hissed, the analysts were wrong. A communication officer approached, his posture showing extreme distress, a universal body language that James Wright would have recognized despite the alien physiology. Supreme Commander, we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet. It is being broadcast on all frequencies. Krell straightened his 7-foot frame. Display it. The main screen showed Admiral Thompson's face, her expression cold and determined. This is Admiral Anna Thompson of the United Earth Defense Fleet. 1 year ago, your forces destroyed our colony of New Eden, killing over 3 million civilians without provocation or warning. We are here to ensure that never happens again. Krell listened as the translation software converted her words. You have 2 options, Thompson continued. Immediate and unconditional surrender, with reparations to be determined for the people of New Eden, or total war against the combined might of humanity. You have 1 hour to respond. The transmission ended, leaving the Vex command center in silence. 1 hour, Tarn finally said. They give us 1 hour to decide the fate of our entire species. Krell moved to the tactical display, studying the overwhelming human force. The Vex had always relied on their superior technology rather than numbers. That advantage meant nothing against a fleet of this size. Send to all vessels, he ordered. Prepare for battle. On the bridge of the Remembrance, Admiral Thompson received the Vex response. They're rejecting our terms. Her communications, officer reported. All Vex vessels are powering weapons. Thompson had expected this. The Vex had shown their character at New Eden. They wouldn't surrender easily. All ships, this is Admiral Thompson. The enemy has chosen to fight. Execute Battle Plan Omega. Throughout the human fleet, crews moved to battle stations. Fighters launched from carrier ships. Electronic warfare vessels activated their jamming systems, targeting the specific frequencies that Commander Wright's intelligence had identified as critical to Vex shield technology. The battle began with a massive, coordinated assault. Thousands of human fighters swarmed toward the Vex defensive line, drawing fire while larger vessels moved into position. Though the Vex weapons were more powerful, they couldn't target the overwhelming number of small craft attacking from all directions. James Wright led a special operations team aboard a stealth insertion craft. Their mission was to board one of the smaller Vex vessels and capture it intact, securing valuable technology and possibly prisoners for interrogation. Approaching target, the pilot announced. Their shields are fluctuating, the jammers are working. James checked his tactical gear one last time. Remember, we need the ship's systems intact, use shock weapons only, and avoid damaging the control center. His team of 12 nodded in understanding. They were the best of Earth's special forces, trained specifically for this mission over the past year. The insertion craft attached to the Vex ship's hull using magnetic clamps. Cutting tools quickly created an entry point, and James led his team inside. The interior was strange. Corridors designed for beings larger than humans with an odd green-blue light that made shadows appear deeper than they should. They encountered the first Vex crew members near what appeared to be an engineering section. The aliens were tall, with grayish skin and 4 arms. They carried energy weapons but seemed unprepared for close-quarters combat. James fired his shock rifle, sending one Vex crumpling to the deck. His team quickly subdued the others. As they moved deeper into the ship, resistance became more organized but still manageable. The Vex, it seemed, were not warriors by nature. Their power came from their technology, not combat skill. The team reached the bridge and secured it within minutes. James ordered the captured crew to be restrained but treated with care. One of his team, a xenolinguist named Dr. Hall, began attempting to communicate with the ship's commander. "They're scared," Dr. Hall reported after a brief exchange. "They never expected us to respond like this. Their leader keeps asking why we brought so many ships." James activated his communication link. "Admiral Thompson, this is Commander Wright. We've secured a Vex vessel with minimal damage. Beginning data extraction now." While James's team worked to download the Vex ship's database, the main battle raged throughout the system. The human fleet's sheer numbers overwhelmed the Vex defenses, despite their technological advantage. Where Vex ships managed to destroy human vessels with their powerful weapons, 10 more human ships moved to fill the gap. Admiral Davis coordinated the attack on the main Vex orbital stations, while Admiral Khatri's forces targeted the defensive platforms protecting the planet below. The human strategy wasn't subtle. It didn't need to be. Overwhelming force applied with a clear objective: total control of the system. On his captured Vex vessel, James received a priority transmission from Admiral Thompson. "Commander, we're detecting unusual energy readings from the Vex homeworld. They may be preparing some kind of last resort weapon. Your new objective is to find information about this weapon in the ship's database." James redirected his team immediately. With the help of the translation software developed from his earlier intelligence gathering, they searched through the alien computer systems. "Found something," reported his tech specialist. "It's not a weapon. It's a communication array. They're sending a distress signal to other Vex systems." James felt a chill. If the Vex could summon reinforcements, the battle might become more complicated. "Admiral," he reported, "the Vex are calling for help. We need to take out their long-range communication systems immediately." Thompson's response was immediate. "Understood. Redirecting strike forces now." Within minutes, precision strikes from human bombers destroyed the massive communication arrays on the Vex world's surface. The distress signal cut off mid-transmission. By the 6-hour mark, the battle was effectively over. The Vex fleet was decimated, their orbital defenses destroyed. Human ships surrounded the planet, weapons trained on key population centers. "Admiral." Thompson opened a channel to the Vex planetary government. "Your fleet is destroyed. Your defenses are gone. Surrender now and your people will be spared." Refuse, and we will have no choice but to continue our attack. This time, the Vex response was immediate. A different alien face appeared on the screen, this one marked with symbols that suggested a political rather than military leader. "We surrender," the Vex leader said through the translation system. "Please, no more destruction. We will meet any terms." The first system had fallen. To the human fleet, Operation Righteous Fury had begun. The human fleet moved through Vex territory like an unstoppable tide. System after system fell, each victory faster than the last as the Vex's limited military resources were stretched beyond breaking. 3 months after the first battle, Admiral Thompson stood on the bridge of the Remembrance, reviewing the latest reports. 5 systems secured, Admiral, Lieutenant Perez reported. Only the Vex homeworld remains. Their remaining fleet has consolidated there, approximately 1,000 ships. Thompson nodded. Status of our forces? We've lost 22,000 vessels across all operations, Perez replied. Most were smaller craft. The majority of our capital ships remain intact. 22,000 ships, a devastating number in any other context. But against the backdrop of 900,000, it represented a remarkably small loss. The Vex technology was superior, but they simply couldn't match humanity's industrial might and determination. And Commander Wright's team? They've completed analysis of the captured Vex databases. His report was sent to your personal terminal an hour ago. He's requesting to speak with you directly, Admiral. Says it's urgent. Thompson raised an eyebrow. James Wright wasn't one for exaggeration. Put him through to my ready room. In the privacy of her office adjoining the bridge, Thompson activated the secure communication system. James's face appeared on the screen, looking troubled despite their overwhelming success. Commander, what have you found? Something that changes. Everything, Admiral, James replied. My team has been translating Vex historical records from the captured ships. The attack on New Eden, it wasn't authorized by their central government. Thompson leaned forward. Explain. The Vex have had a military faction called the Protectors, extremists who believed any expansion by other species represented an existential threat. They operated with significant autonomy. James paused. According to these records, this faction launched the attack on New Eden against the orders of the Vex ruling council. Are you saying their government didn't approve the attack? Thompson asked, her voice carefully controlled. Not only did they not approve it, they tried to stop it. James sent several translated documents to her screen. The ruling council sent ships to intercept the attack force, but they were too late. After New Eden was destroyed, there was internal conflict. The military faction seized control, claiming that an overwhelming human response was coming and only they could save the Vex. Thompson was silent for a long moment, processing this information. And this military faction is the one we've been fighting. Yes. But according to these most recent records, they've been overthrown. The original government has regained control of the homeworld after our last victory. James's expression was grim. We've been at war with the wrong Vex, Admiral. The Remembrance led the final approach to the Vex homeworld, a blue-green planet orbiting a yellow star. The remaining human fleet, still over 870,000 ships strong, formed a sphere around the system ready for the final battle. But the expected resistance didn't materialize. Instead, a transmission came from the planet's surface requesting direct communication with the human leadership. In the Remembrance's conference room, a holographic projector displayed the image of the Vex High Chancellor, the leader of their civilian government. Standing beside Admiral Thompson were Commander James Wright and President Garcia, who had traveled from Earth to witness the end of the conflict. High Admiral, the Vex leader began, using Thompson's incorrectly translated title. We formally request an end to hostilities and offer our unconditional surrender. President Garcia stepped forward. We accept your surrender, but before we discuss terms, we need answers. Over 3 million of our people died at New Eden. Someone must be held accountable. The High Chancellor's forearms moved in a complex gesture that the translation software interpreted as deep regret. The destruction of your colony was not authorized by our government. The military faction responsible has been removed from power. Those who ordered the attack have been imprisoned and await justice. Justice? James couldn't help interrupting. What justice can there be for 3 million dead? The Vex leader turned toward him. No justice can restore lives lost. But we offer not only accountability but reparation. The alien pressed something on a control panel. We wish to share with humanity all our technological advancements, medical, scientific, engineering, and we offer our knowledge of other species in this sector of the galaxy, some of whom pose greater threats than we ever did. Admiral Thompson studied the Vex carefully. Why would you share such valuable resources? Because we recognize now what we failed to see before, the High Chancellor replied. Humanity is not merely another expanding species. You are a force, unlike any we have encountered. When faced with the destruction of one colony, you responded with a fleet that could conquer worlds. Your industrial capacity, your unity of purpose, these are strengths we cannot match. The alien's translator conveyed a tone of genuine respect. We believed ourselves superior because of our technology. You have shown us that technology alone does not determine a species' power. Better to have humanity as allies than enemies. President Garcia and Admiral Thompson exchanged glances. This was more than they had expected. Not just victory, but the potential for a significant advancement of human civilization. We will need guarantees, Thompson said. Verification of your claims about the military faction, oversight of the transfer of technology, and most importantly, a formal acknowledgement of responsibility for New Eden. All of this and more, the High Chancellor agreed. We also propose a joint memorial to honor those lost, a place of remembrance and commitment that such actions will never be repeated. 1 year later, James Wright stood on the rebuilt central plaza of New Eden. The colony had been reconstructed with Vex assistance, its buildings more advanced and secure than before. New inhabitants had begun to settle there, drawn by the opportunity to be part of humanity's most distant outpost. In the center of the plaza stood a monument of black stone and glowing blue crystal, a combination of human and Vex artistic styles. Etched into the stone were the names of every person who had died in the original attack. Below the names was an inscription in both human and Vex languages. We explore in peace but answer violence with overwhelming force. Remember New Eden. Robert, Lisa, and Michael stood beside James looking up at the monument. Michael, now 12, placed a small toy spaceship at its base, the same model he had shown James on that fateful day 2 years ago. Do you think there will be more fighting? Michael asked. James put his hand on his nephew's shoulder. Not with the Vex. And if other threats emerge, they'll face both our species, not just one. The alliance between humans and Vex had already yielded remarkable advances. Vex medical technology had extended human lifespans. Human manufacturing methods had revolutionized Vex production. Together, they were stronger than either would have been alone. Admiral Thompson approached, now wearing the formal uniform of the newly formed Interstellar Defense Command. Commander Wright, or should I say Director Wright, your new office at the Joint Species Intelligence Agency is ready. James nodded. Thank you, Admiral. I'll report there next week. He had accepted a role coordinating information about potential threats to both human and Vex interests, a position that would help ensure nothing like the New Eden disaster ever happened again. As the sun set over the new colony, ships could be seen in orbit, some human, some Vex, all working together to build defensive systems that would protect this restored world. The Vex had destroyed one human colony. 900,000 human ships had been humanity's reply. And from that show of strength had come not just victory but something more valuable, understanding and alliance. The stars remained open to exploration, and humanity's place among them was secure.